Alright, in this presentation I'm going to talk to you about Judaism or Judaism, so I say it both ways. Um, Judaism is interesting in that it is not, so we covered it as one of the five major religions of the world, but in terms of ranking, I don't think it says it on this slide, it's like 8th, 9th in the world. It's not it doesn't have a huge following. Why do we cover it? Well, it started in Israel. It has strong connections with Christianity and Islam. Some of them recognize some of the same people, such as Abraham. We'll talk about that here in a second. In other stories, such as like the Holocaust, the Jews have a central role in that. So we cover it kind of for multiple reasons, and it's a religion that most people have heard of. But you can see that there are 14 million Jews worldwide, which is significantly smaller than like Christianity and Islam, and even Hinduism and Buddhism are quite a bit smaller than that. So this is kind of the area we're talking about, where the arrow is pointing there. That is the area of what is called Canaan, and that's where kind of Abraham is this first guy that kind of receives a message from God that his family and he is being chosen to be the grandfather of everyone. So all Jewish people can kind of like trace their ancestry back to Abraham, and that's Jewish by ethnicity, so the people of this area. So he's kind of a central figure. He also appears in the Bible because much of the Bible overlaps with the Torah, which is the book of the Jews read, the Holy Book. Many of you may know the story of Moses, which is also in the Bible. So it's a story that also the Jews recognize. And he delivers the people out of Egypt. They then wander around in the desert for a while, and then Israel goes through this time of stability. The time when David and Goliath becomes king. He has a son named Solomon, and there are lots of kings in this whole Jewish line. The kingdom is divided at one point between Israel and Judah, but that's kind of a little bit more in the history of that. I want to kind of stay focused on talking about the religion. Some of this talks about the Jews being persecuted in Zionism. We're going to skip past most of that right now. For what I really would like to talk about, you can see this is modern day Israel today. There's been a lot of conflict when we get to studying this part of Asia. This is Asia. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the conflict that's existed here in places like Palestine. So you've seen this before. This description of this table showing the connection. So all Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all trace back to Abraham. And Abraham had two sons. He had a son Isaac and a son named Ishmael. And Ishmael is kind of who the Islamic people trace their lineage through. But Abraham is kind of a really important person amongst all these religions. So Jews often refer to God as Yahweh. That's the term that they use. So some of the kind of the big tenets of Judaism are kind of really the Ten Commandments in a lot of ways. That would be something that they would follow. So belief in one God. It's a monotheistic religion, as most of the religions we're going to talk about are. God is kind of like omnipresent and all-knowing. The Jews believe that God will reward the good and punish the wicked. Kind of in this idea of heaven and hell, the same way that a Christian would understand that. And you pray directly to God. This is kind of really where we get the differences, and you may have picked this up in the Christianity lesson that we had. But one of the main differences here is that Jews are still waiting on the Messiah to arrive. Christians believe that it has arrived in the form of Jesus Christ. So some of the main differences between the two. There's some other differences, such as diet. We might talk about that here in a few minutes. That's one of the main differences between the two. In Judaism, they read something called the Torah. It's often shown on like a scroll, like you see in this picture here. So how they read it, and so like in book form, you can buy it that way, online or whatever. But usually in synagogues it's read this way, and it's the first 5 books of the Old Testament. But then also the Tanakh is basically almost all of the Old Testament. And so they read both of those. So really, if you read the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, you are reading most of what the Jews would read. And that's the story of kind of leading up to the Messiah. The New Testament Christianity is all about Jesus, and that's something that they really wouldn't accept, that he is the Messiah at all. There's a couple different varieties of Jews. There are Orthodox, Conservative, and Reformed. There's a lot of differences here. Orthodox are the most conservative, maybe a little bit more confusing because conservative is one of the terms. Orthodox, you may have seen before, men often have beards, dressed in all black. There's side curls that they have too. A Reformed Jew may dress like you and I, not look different at all in appearance. Many Jews follow a kosher diet, meaning they would not eat certain things based on the Old Testament law. So there's a whole lot of laws or rules they had to follow. One of those would not be not eating pork. Islamic people are the same way. They don't eat pork. That's not something that a Reformed Jew would necessarily follow. I actually had a speaker come in a couple years ago and talk about being a Reformed Jew, and she didn't even follow even all the holidays as much. She didn't stick to any kind of a diet. She dressed in a way that was not even, you couldn't identify her with a certain religion. So there's differences between those, just like there's differences in the different types of Christianity as well. But they all believe in this kind of central idea of one God. So some terms I've used: the synagogue. You see the synagogue up here. This picture of this building, that's like the house of worship. You may have seen these head coverings here, often worn by men, especially at like a bar mitzvah or a wedding. Prayer shawls, which I believe are mainly worn by rabbis, but they might be worn by any man during a religious ceremony. Some other things here that we weren't going to really get into. Holidays. This is kind of an interesting part here. Let me move myself up here a little bit higher, so this will be really helpful. So probably of the holidays listed here, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Passover, and Hanukkah. Maybe you've heard of a couple of these. Sometimes Passover, Christians might reference this because it's around the time of Easter. So it often gets tied in there. Passover has to deal with the Egyptians being kind of being able to get out of Egypt. It's a long story, but their houses are basically passed over, and the Egyptians' houses are not passed over, and children die, and Pharaoh releases them, and so they celebrate this now. And then Christianity ties into that because when Jesus had this Last Supper with his disciples, that was the Passover meal. So there's kind of a tie there between those two. Hanukkah, you probably know because it's close to Christmas time. It's a festival of lights. Has to do with this old story about lamps being out of oil. We might talk about that a little bit more in class. But the most important holiday here is kind of really Passover. Is in my opinion, is Yom Kippur, maybe up there as well. But Hanukkah is definitely not the most popular holiday. It gets that attention around Christmas time, but it's not really the most important holiday at all. So that's a little bit of an overview. We've gone through all the slides on Judaism. Really big things: knowing that it's monotheistic, knowing that they read the Torah, and that is the Old Testament of the Bible, and they are still waiting on a Messiah to arrive, are kind of really the main principles that I want you to know of this. And knowing that the biggest concentration of Jewish people are still in Israel. And there are quite a few Jews in the United States and then scattered around the rest of the world. There used to be a really high concentration in Europe before the Holocaust, but millions were killed because of their Jewish ancestry or their Jewish faith. And that's the last thing I'll leave with. Being Jewish, you can either be Jewish by ancestry, Jewish by faith, or both. So depending on if your ethnicity is Jewish or if your religion is Jewish, there's a difference there, whereas you can't really have that as a difference with Christianity or one of the other religions. So I'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.